Okay, hey guys. Um, Yesterday when we finished reading, Alex and Connor had found what they thought was going to be a very difficult item to find. They needed the tear of a what?
A fairy.
Good. They needed the tear of a fairy. And most fairies that we know are typically very happy little beings, and they thought it was going to be super difficult. But the moment they got into the fairy kingdom, they heard crying in the distance, and then they found a little fairy. Who remembers her name? It was not Twinkletail, but that is a good idea. Her name was Trix. Her name was Trix, and she was sad because she'd gotten in trouble. Do you remember what she'd gotten in trouble for, Gianni?
Tricking other fairies?
Yes, she used her magic on another fairy. She turned another fairy's wings into prune leaves because he wasn't being very nice to her. And she said it only lasted for a few seconds, and she turned him right back to what he was supposed to be. But now the fairy council, that's like the judge or judges of the kingdom, are threatening to exile her from the fairy kingdom. That means make her go away and never be able to return because she used her magic on another fairy. So Alex wants to help her instead of going after the tear, making her cry. Like, she wants to help the situation. She wants to calm down the fairy and see what she can do to help the situation. What is Connor's take on the whole situation? Emma?
No.
He was Gianni?
It's the tear.
He just wants the tear. He doesn't really care about why that fairy is crying. He was like, get the tear and let's just get on out of here. Okay, please make sure your masks are on and up. And we are going to pick up reading today on page 265.
Whoa. That's a bigger number.
Ooh, we're further along than that. Okay, so long story short, Alex kind of wins Connor over, and he was like, look, we are all that this fairy has right now, and we're going to be there for her in her time of need. Okay, this is the second time I have said masks up. If you cannot get them up, you're going to have to go back to your seats. When we all come back full time next week, we won't be here on the floor because we're going to be too close together. Right now, take advantage of being able to do this. Okay, so anyway, Trix is leading the way. Alex and Connor are following, and Trix takes the twins to the center of the fairy palace. Oh, this would be the perfect place for a wedding, Alex said. At the front of the room were 7 fairies, Alex and Connor's size. And they looked like a living rainbow. Each was dressed in a specific color, and they stood behind podiums positioned over an arch. That's the fairy council, Trix said. That's Rosetta, the red fairy, Tangerina, the orange fairy, Xanthos, the yellow fairy, Emeralda's the green fairy. She's mostly the one in charge. And Skylene is the blue fairy. Violetta, the purple fairy. And Coral, the pink fairy. Rosetta was short and plump and had very rosy cheeks. Tangerina was stylish and wore her orange hair in a large beehive with actual bees flying around it. Xanthos was male. He wore a shiny suit. His pants were ablaze. What does that mean? If his pants were ablaze, they were on what, Gianni?
Fire.
Fire! So he had some hot pants. Emeralda was tall and beautiful. She was black and wore a long emerald dress that matched her eyes and jewelry. Skylene was very pale and had hair the color of the sky and flowing robes the color of the sea. Violetta was the oldest and had grayish purplish hair. Coral was the youngest, no more than a few years older than the twins in appearance, and wore a simple pink dress and had a pair of pink wings on her back. Did you need me or are you hanging out? Okay. There were 2 empty seats on either side of the podiums. "Who sits there?" Alex asked Trix. "The fairy godmother sits on the left and Mother Goose sits on the right," Trix says. "They complete the fairy council, although they're rarely here. They're always traveling around the kingdoms helping people." "Is that you, Trix?" Emeralda asks. "Yes, I'm here." Trix peeked nervously and flew to the front of the podiums. "You're late. Please come forward," Emeralda said. She was gracious but authoritative, someone the twins would definitely want in their corner during an altercation. "Trix, do you know why you've been called before the Fairy Council?" Trix shamefully nodded her head and said, "Yes, ma'am." "Being a fairy requires a strong sense of responsibility," Tangerina said. "Responsibility you haven't shown." Trix nodded some more, her eyes swelling with tears. "I know," she squeaked. "Unfortunately, we can't let your actions go unpunished," Violetta said. "We need to make an example of you to reinforce the #1 rule of being a fairy," Rosetta said. "To never, under any circumstance, use your magic harmfully against another person, place, or thing," Xanthos said. "Unfortunately, there's only one thing for us to do," Skylene said. "We have to banish you from the fairy kingdom," Coral said. Trix covered her eyes and wept harder and harder than she had wept all day. "I understand," she squeaked in between sobs. "Whoa, whoa, 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 whoa," Connor yelled from the back. "Hold on. Are you kidding me?" He promptly walked to the front of the room and stood next to the spot where Trix was hovering. "Connor," Alex said, and tried to grab him, but it was too late. "Are you seriously going to ban her for making one little mistake?" Connor asked the council with his hands on his hips. There was whispering and murmuring among them. They were appalled that someone would so openly question their judgment. "Please don't try to help me," Trix whispered to Connor. "Young man, who do you think you are?" Xanthos said. "Well, I'm just a kid, but even I can tell you that your ruling is ridiculous," Connor said. They all gasped, except Emeralda, who kept her calm and imposing demeanor. Alex slammed an open palm against her forehead. "How dare you?" Tangerina said, and the bees swirling around her hair grew mad and flew faster and faster around her head. "You are out of line," Violetta said. "How disrespectful," Coral said. "How rude," Skylene said. Emeralda was the only member of the assembly to remain silent. She studied Connor with her emerald green eyes. "Silence," Emeralda ordered. She raised her hand, and all of her fellow assembly fairies went quiet. "Let the boy speak. I want to hear what he has to say. Go ahead, young man." Connor wasn't sure if this was a trick or not, but he didn't hold back. "Listen, I'm not a fairy, thank goodness. And I'm not perfect either. I try to be the best person and the best student possible. But every once in a while I slip up I forget a homework assignment or I fall asleep in class. My best effort isn't as good as someone else's might be, and no one should have the right to scold or punish me or publicly humiliate me for it, Connor said. Trix knew what the rules were and still committed an offense against one of her peers, Rosetta said. No one can be perfect, Connor said, and from what I hear, that guy had it coming. Where is his trial? Why isn't he here? Why do I always get detention for sleeping when it's ancient Mesopotamia that should be punished for being so boring? The council continued to be outraged by his outburst. Many members didn't want to tolerate it and tried to leave. I hear what the child is saying, Emeralda said, but we can't just pardon Trix. We're the Fairy Council. It wouldn't be a good message to the rest of the kingdom, Tangerina said. Look, Orange Lady, Connor said, in the last week, my sister and I have almost been eaten by a witch, narrowly missed being attacked by a pack of wolves, were almost killed by a possessive bridge troll, survived a burning castle, and barely escaped a life of enslavement in the troll and goblin territory. If you ask me, you have bigger problems than a fairy turning a bully's wings into leaves. Looks to me like you're busy yourselves with dumb little things so that you feel like you're doing something, when in reality, you can't handle what's really going on out there. The council went silent, and all of the members appeared to become very concerned. Enslavement? Skylene asked. You mean the trolls and goblins are still kidnapping and enslaving people? Yeah, Connor said. There were dozens of us down there. We really could have used your help, but I guess you were too busy slapping fairies' wrists for playing pranks on one another. Although they held their stoic expressions, the council were secretly ashamed of themselves. Connor was right. They eyed one another for a moment before Emeralda broke the silence. On behalf of this council, I hereby forgive Trix for her crimes, Emeralda said. Xanthos, Skylene, and Tangerine and I say we pay a visit to the Troll King and Goblin King immediately, and furthermore, let this be a lesson to all of us. Xanthos, Skylene, and Tangerina nodded and then disappeared in thin air with a pop. Tristan, you're going to need to go back to your seat, babe. Thank you, Mr. Emeralda said. Wishington, Connor said. I am Connor Wishington. Emeralda smiled and then disappeared with the others. Trix flew up to Connor's face and gave him a huge hug. That's the bravest and nicest thing anyone has ever done for me, Trix said. Connor looked back at his sister. She was beaming with pride. She was so proud of her brother. It was a look Connor rarely got to see. You know, helping a fairy isn't going to take away any unhappy memories from school, Alex told him when she joined Connor and Trix near the podium. Connor slyly grinned. I had to say something. I would have regretted it if I hadn't. The remaining Fairy Council fairies began to leave. Some simply walked off, and others disappeared into thin air, leaving behind sparks or bubbles as they went. Coral was searching the room for something and patted her lap as she went. Here, Fisher. Where are you, Fisher? Coral said. A fish with 4 legs ran past Alex and Connor and jumped into Coral's lap. There you are, Coral said. It's just about time for your lunch. Alex and Connor looked at each other confused and wondering if the other had just seen that too. Is that what I think it is? Connor asked. I think so, Alex said. Coral was just about to leave when the twins stopped her. Excuse me, Alex said. Where did you get your fish? "Oh, Fisher," Coral said, "I dropped a wand into a lake once and granted him a wish after he swam down and got it for me. He wished for legs, silly thing, so that he could play with some boy who lived in a village nearby. The boy ended up dying, sadly, so Fisher came to live with me." Coral's wings began to flap, and she flew away with her pet fish. "So that was what we thought it was," Connor said. "Yes," said Alex. Her head was spinning with questions. "That was the walking fish from Dad's story." Isn't that interesting? You know that they always said their dad had a story for everything. And now this is more than once they're finding some connections with some of the stories that they've been told before. Oh, and you did see the werewolf picture. Chapter 13 is coming up next, and it's called The Wolf Pack. That is a fierce. That's what I was thinking.
Yeah.
That is a very fierce looking wolf right there.
Yeah, it looks awesome. It looks 100%
Mhm.
awesome.
Yes, it is.
Eat somebody.
Okay, we're going to squeeze in one more page. Chapter 13 is called A Wolf Pact. There was blood everywhere. White feathers and bits of wood covered the ground. A driver had been transporting a cart full of geese into the northern kingdom when the big bad wolf pack attacked. The only thing that remained in one piece was the green floppy hat the driver had been wearing. The wolves were spread out under the trees, chewing on the bones of their victims. Malum Claw jerked his head up and stared into the trees. Someone was coming. He could smell them. Whoever this person was, their scent made him anxious. "We've got company," Malum Claw growled. All the wolves jumped to their feet, ready to attack him if they had to. But they were no match for who was approaching. A dark hooded figure slowly moved through the trees and up to the wolves. It stood fiercely in front of them for a moment before unveiling itself. "Hello, Malum Claw," said the evil queen. "Who are you?" Malum Claw barked. The woman before him, less than half his size, was making the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. "You don't know me, but I know you," the evil queen said. "Everyone does." "It's the evil queen," the wolf snarled. Malum Claw began shifting his weight to his front paws. He was intimidated and he didn't like it. "You have a lot of nerve approaching my pact," he said. "I should have one of my wolves rip your throat out, woman." "I dare you," said the evil queen. There wasn't an ounce of fear in her body. She walked closer to them, and the wolves cowered back, Malum Claw included. "What do you want from us?" he demanded. "I've come to make a deal," she said. "We don't make deals," Malum Claw growled. "You will, once you know what I have to offer," the evil queen said. This intrigued the wolf. "What kind of a deal?" he asked. "A trade, if you will," the evil queen said. "There are 2 children traveling through the kingdoms, one boy and one girl, twins. I want you to find them and bring them to me, unscratched." "You want children?" Malum Claw mocked. "They have something, several things actually, that I need," the evil queen said. "I would do it myself, but I'm indisposed at the moment." And if we bring them to you, what will you give us in return? Malenclaw asked. When you bring them to me, I shall give you the one thing that you want more than anything else in this world, the evil queen said. Malenclaw laughed. Wolves want for nothing, he said. The evil queen stared at him as if she were looking into his soul. Is that so? She said. Then why do you and your pack crusade around the lands, terrorizing everything in your paths? What are you trying to prove? Whose revenge are you seeking? Malenclaw was silent. He couldn't deny it. I will give you the one thing that will avenge your father's death wholly, the evil queen said. I will give you Queen Red Riding Hood in exchange for the twins. All the wolves, including Malenclaw, growled their doubts, but the idea was intriguing to him. And how could you possibly do that? He said. The evil queen looked at him so sternly that his heart began to race. Do you question me? I will have the young queen in my possession by the end of the week. Bring me the children, and I will hand her over to you. Do we have a deal or not? Malenclaw looked at the frightened members of his pack. They nodded at him. They didn't want to upset the queen. Deal, Malenclaw growled. But let me warn you, if you fail to keep up with your end of the bargain, we'll snap your neck like a twig. The evil queen walked up to the wolf and stood inches from his face, looking him forcefully in the eye. Let me warn you, she said. Fail to keep your part, and I will have you all turned into rugs, just as Red Riding Hood did to your father. And if you ever threaten me again, I'll skin you myself. Malenclaw froze. The evil queen knew that she had him exactly where she wanted him. See you soon, she said. She put her hood back over her head and disappeared into the streets in the direction she'd come from. All the wolves stood silent for a moment, afraid to move. What are you waiting for? Malenclaw shouted. His pride was bruised. We have twins to find. They charged into the horizon, howling in unison. The sound was deafening. That was a short little chapter, so I wanted to squeeze it in. I said we'd get 2 pages. It was 4. All right. See you soon, guys.